Good afternoon, students. Welcome to the contact-based classes for July. This is exam-based contact classes. My name is Ms. Tangi Ausiku, and I am your assessment and evaluation tutor. Students, I would like to welcome you all to the study of assessment and evaluation, which plays a very important role in your studies to become a teacher. You might, however, not know all the assessment tools and the assessment techniques that are there, but as time progresses, as your career goes forward, you will discover the different types of assessments and assessment techniques that are there. I hope you find great pleasure and enjoyment in the subject of assessment and evaluation, and also in the process of designing your own assessment activities. As students, I would like to urge you all to commit to your studies and make sure you allow enough time to go through your work. If there are any queries or any difficulties, please do not hesitate to contact me on the following number, which is 081-2902-871, or you can email me at tajtangi@gmail.com. Students, I also urge you to form a WhatsApp group in order for you to study as a group, in order for you to share information with one another, because remember that two heads are better than one. A WhatsApp group is also important because I, as a tutor, will also be added to the group, and we can all discuss things that may hinder you with the course. It is also important that you do not only rely on the study guide, and that you rely also on other materials. So do visit the IOL centers or different libraries, or you can use the Google search engine in order for you to find any information that may be beneficial to what we are doing in the course. Students, now I have come to realize that during the exams, you will often struggle with the different verbs outlined by Bloom's taxonomy that we use when we set our question papers. Our question papers are set according to the level of Bloom's taxonomy and the verbs that have been outlined. And there are a few of these verbs that I would like us to look at too. The first one is when you are asked to define, students, you need to give a precise meaning of something. Giving the definition, because the word define is derived from the word definition. The second one is when you are asked to compare. It's always best to compare the similarities and the differences, unless the question states otherwise. But if you're asked to compare, you need to indicate the similarities and differences. It is easier for me, the marker, if you perhaps use it or perhaps write it in a tabular form, so that I know now these are the similarities and these are the differences, because then they are differentiated as such. We're moving on to the next verb, which is when you are asked to describe. When you are asked to describe, you provide a detailed feature of an issue or stages, meaning that when you are asked to describe, you need to give the characteristics, the features of a particular something that you are asked to describe. This meaning that if you are asked to describe me, who is Ms. Ausiku, for example, you will say she's a female, she's this height, she's this body weight, you understand? So you need to give a description, basically, of what is asked of you, of what is expected of you. When you are asked to determine, you use information given to work out an answer. So this is where you apply knowledge that you have been given. When you are asked to discuss, you give a clear description and then argue the features by pointing out the positives and the negatives of something. Discussing means you say everything that you know about. Let's say you are asked to discuss setting up matching questions, for example. So you start discussing everything that has to do with matching questions. You start talking about the aims, the constructions, the advantages and the disadvantages, everything that you are able to think of at that point in time that has to do with the question at hand. But students, I urge you not to go off topic and to stick to the topic. please, when you are asked to discuss. Now, when you are asked to explain, you're describing something and indicating the relationship between two things. So if you are asked to explain, you also not discussing, but you are going into detail specifically on a specific entity that you have been asked about, not just explaining and giving a definition. All right. Moving on, students, now that we have looked at the verbs that are used in the exams, I would like to touch on the April exam. The April exam went fairly okay. Some of you did well, some of you did quite bad, but it's seemingly because maybe you do not understand the verbs outlined by Bloom. But then it is also important that you stick to what is expected of you, students. Students, you do not want to memorize, and by memorizing means you need to know things by heart. You need to know the advantages of pure assessment by heart, because at times, most of the time, you tend to write your own general knowledge, which is not sufficient enough to give you the marks that is expected of you. So I urge you all, students, to kindly memorize. If you memorize, you stand a better chance to pass the exam, because that is the major problem, that you are not passing the exams, because I tend to park the memo, because then I need to go with your general knowledge. The memo will just guide me, but then I need to give you the benefit of the doubt, which is not fair. You need to know the work, because this is a work that you are going to use lifelong. So students, I once again urge you that you need to memorize. 3 o'clock in the morning, if you are woken up and you are asked the advantages of matching questions, you need to know. If you are asked the 12 principles of assessment, you need to know them by heart and what they entail. Furthermore, I also urge that if you struggle to memorize, then form study groups with people, or find students that are in your area of living or in the area that you are living in order for you to start up study groups, because 2 heads are always better than 1. Then the work is probably simplified for you by the next person, because we always learn best from our peers. Moving on. Now, this contact-based classes, contact session will look at the basic concepts, which is Unit 1. It will look at Unit 2. It will look at Unit 3, Unit 4, Unit 5, as well as Unit 6 and 7. Students, I also wanted to remind you that, please, this is just a guide towards the exam. It is not a scope, but you are welcome. You anyway have to study the work that is also in the study guide, because this is in the study guide. This plus your study guide, you must study in order for you to pass the August exam. Now, in Unit 1, we will look at the 3 learning domains. We will look at the educational outcomes and learning outcomes. We will look at the summative and formative assessment. We will look at peer and self-assessment. We will look at the purpose of assessment and evaluation. We will look at the principles of good assessment practices. And we will look at continuous assessment and coursework. Now, when we talk about the 3 learning domains, most of you are aware that we have the cognitive domain, which deals with the intellectual capability and skills of a person. We have the affective domain, which deals with emotions and feelings. And then we have the psychomotor domain, which deals with performing a sequence of motor activities with accuracy, smoothness, or force. Those are the 3 domains outlined by Bloom. Now, coming to the learning outcomes and the educational objectives. What is an educational objectives? Usually, educational objectives as well as learning objectives are outlined in our syllabus. Now, in our syllabus, the educational objectives are much more broader than the learning objectives. They are, in effect, policy statements that give direction to the education system to provide a foundation on which the education system is built, meaning that the educational objectives are there. They are standard, they are fixed, they cannot be changed. The purpose of educational objectives are to prepare teaching or learning programs, to facilitate course planning, to facilitate learning, facilitate evaluation, help with curriculum design, and select approaches of instruction. Then we move on to the learning outcomes. The learning outcomes is the middle part of your syllabus after your learning objectives. The outcomes is what you will use inside the classroom. So the objectives, they just guide the learning outcomes which we use in our classroom. So learning outcomes are statements of what a learner is expected to know after a specific given topic, and understand and be able to demonstrate after the completion of the process of learning. The purpose of learning outcomes is to give a learner a clear understanding of what is expected of them, to give the teacher a clear indication of the content which learning activities are suitable for that specific topic, and to influence the learning domain and the learning that is required. So that is the two types of objectives and or outcomes. Then we move on to the formative assessment. Formative assessment is any assessment that is done during the course of the year in order to improve learning and teaching, and in order to see where the progress of the learners are. For example, a test is formative assessment. A class activity is formative assessment. This is assessment done during the course of the year. Usually as teachers we do it at the end of a topic or at the end of a theme. Then you have a summative assessment. Summative assessment is made or done at the end of the school year. It is based on an accumulation of progress and knowledge and achievement that has been done throughout the year. So during the course of the year, you are teaching different topics. And now at the end of the year, you compile an examination as a whole, which includes all the information that was discussed during the course of the year. Then you set one paper in order to test the progress of your learners. Students, now when we are testing progress of our learners, we usually have different types of methods that we use. So two of them that I would like to discuss with you are the peer and the self-assessment. Self-assessment deals with assessment about revision and improvement. It enables learners to independently assess their own and other learners' progress with confidence rather than always relying on the teacher. So this allows learners also to grow, because then they realize their own mistakes and then they realize where they are going wrong and how to improve. The advantages of self-assessment is the learners become able to identify their own learning. They get to know their strengths and weaknesses. They see how they are doing in their schoolwork. It makes them think critically, and they get to know when and why their work is good, and they get to improve their work and their learning. The disadvantages of self-assessment is learners lack an ability to evaluate each other. They may also not take one another seriously, like allowing friendships or other factors to influence them. It may cause discrimination, and without a teacher's intervention, it might get out of hand. Usually when teachers are not there, learners do not do anything. Now, then we have got peer assessment. Peer assessment is nearly the same as self-assessment, except that learners are explicitly involved in learning each other to identify the standards and criteria and making judgments about each other's work in relation to these criteria. Meaning what happens is the teacher gives out an activity, and then she gives the memo or the answers to the learners. Then the kids, they swap books. After swapping books, then they mark each other's work based on the marking scheme or the grid that they have received from the teacher. And then once that is done, they compare now. Then they give back each other's books and they compare one another's answers. The teacher usually just comes in as a facilitator to make sure whether the work is done correctly. There is an example here. When you are free in your free time, you can always read into it and clearly think about it. For example, learners can compile a checklist for an oral assessment of peers. The checklist is compared to that of the one of the teacher, and a final one is agreed upon, the one that they will use to grade one another. After the presentation is given, they rank their performance against the criteria that they both set. The final mark of the presentation can be derived from the average of several peers' ratings. If the learner's mark is different from that of the teacher can then discuss the mark with the learners. So learners get to learn from one another. The advantages of peer assessment. Students, peer assessment brings learners in contact with the learning content, and it helps them to view the learning as non-threatening. Sometimes learners are very afraid of learning, but then actually learning is not so threatening. There's nothing that's going to bite them if they work together in class. It encourages cooperation between learners, even though learner that is most passive in class will be able to also have a say and does not feel left out. And it also boosts the self-confidence of the learners, especially those that are passive. They tend to actually also most of the time come out. And then it encourages active learning. Learners receive prompt feedback, often directly after the completion of an assessment or an activity. Now, the disadvantages of peer assessment. It takes time to explain to learners or how peer assessment works and what is expected of them. And your learners have not gone through the process of teaching, so they are not also aware of how certain things are done. So that process takes time to explain to the learners what actually is going on. It takes time for the learners to become skilled in the assessment of their peers. There is a risk of peers giving inflated marks because of friendships and peer pressure. Learners have a tendency to give everybody the same mark. Usually we call it monkey see, monkey do, because the neighbor has given 5, he will also just give 5. Now, assessment and evaluation has got different purposes and reasons. Assessment has its own purposes and evaluation has its own purposes, but let's look at the both of them incorporated together. Assessment and evaluation, their purposes are to inform teaching, to promote and encourage learning, and to promote optimal growth, and to motivate the learners as well as the teachers. Then we come to the 12 principles of assessment. This was also part of the exam, where students were asked to explain or to discuss the 12 assessment principles of assessment. If I'm not mistaken, I speak under correction. There was 24 marks, 30 marks allocated for this question, whereby some of you just made a mess, but what was expected of you was that you were supposed to outline all 12 and explain all 12 in order for you to get all the marks. So usually students just name them, and because they have not studied the definitions or what they entail, then they lose marks there. So it's very important that you memorize the 12 principles and what they entail. And always, students, I also want to urge you to look at the mark allocation. The mark allocation will guide you as to how much you should write about the 12 principles. So assessment have got 12 principles, which are assessments needs to be valid. You can read through more in your study guide. Assessment needed to be relevant. It needs to be appropriate. Assessment should be clear. It should be fair at all times and also accurate. Assessment should provide useful information. Information can usually lead to change as well. Assessment should be integrated into the teaching cycle. It should draw a wide range of evidence. Assessment should be manageable. It should also be transferable. And last but not least, assessment should be educative. Then we move on. Well, we move on to continuous assessment. Continuous assessment is marks. It's an assessment that goes on an ongoing assessment, whereby it is ongoing and it has advantages to the teacher, to the learner, to the teaching and learning, it also has to the teacher and learner relationship. So in the exams, you should now carefully remember and also understand that in the exams, if you're perhaps asked that discuss the advantages or discuss the disadvantages of assessment, it should be clearly indicated, or you should clearly know that it's asking whether it's advantages of assessment to the teacher which are as follows. Teacher, advantages of continuous assessment to the teacher. A, teachers can monitor the impact of their lessons on learners' understanding. Teacher assesses the curriculum as implemented in the classroom. It places teachers at the center of all performance assessment activities. It encourages more teacher participation in the overall assessment or grading of learners. That is assessment to the teacher. Then you have assessment to teaching, to the teaching, what the teacher does in the classroom, which is it gives the teacher enough time to modify their teaching styles if necessary to teaching. It allows teachers to evaluate the effectiveness of their teaching strategies relative to the curriculum and to change those strategies as indicated by the needs of their learners. Teachers can modify their pedagogical strategies to include the construction of remediation activities for pupils who are not working at the expected grade level. Then you have advantages of continuous assessment to the learner. To the learner, a full range of the learner's performance is captured. The learner's strengths and weaknesses are diagnosed. The teacher can see where the gaps in the learning are, but also where learning activities are not challenging enough. Enrichment activities for learners who are working at or above the expected grade can be designed. The learner's progress is assessed and there is time to correct problems if there are any. It is a powerful diagnostic tool that enables learners to understand the areas in which they are having difficulties and to concentrate on their efforts in those areas. It supports the cycle of self-evaluation and pupil-specific activities by both the pupils and the teachers. It provides information on achievement of a particular level or skill. It enables pupils to monitor their achievement of grade levels, goals, and to visualize their progress towards goals before it is too late to achieve them. Now, we also look at the continuous assessment advantages to the learning itself. The data is gathered over a long period of time, therefore the data is more accurate. It integrates assessment and assessment results into instructional practice. Then you have advantages of continuous assessment to the teacher-learner relationship. It fosters a pupil-teacher relationship based on individual interactions. Pupils learn that the teacher values their achievements and their achievement outcomes have an impact on the instruction that they receive. One-to-one communications between the teacher and the pupil can motivate the pupil to continue attending school and to work harder to achieve higher levels of mastery. It incorporates assessment into a larger learning framework and allows for discussion of standards for learners to work with colleagues, parents, and learners. Then we're looking at coursework. Coursework relates to research projects of specified amount of work assigned to the learner to complete within a period of time, usually a term, a semester, or a year. Coursework stimulates the development of analytical thought, research skill, and presenting an argument based on evidence that is being collected. There are different challenges when it comes to coursework. The challenges of coursework are time management. Coursework or projects are usually bigger assignments that make demands on the time of the learners, meaning that sometimes the project is so big that the learner does not have enough time to complete the task. Or maybe the data that the learner needs to correct is so much that the learner does not have enough time to collect the information. Over-enthusiasm. Some learners become overly enthusiastic about the project and do much more than that is required, and sometimes they go off topic. Parents doing the work. This is one of the biggest challenges of coursework and is very common. You find yourself giving a task to your learners, then you tell them to complete the task at home. And the child comes home, Mom, Dad, I have a project. All that the mother does or the parent does is take the assessment sheet, goes online, gets the information for the child, buys a poster, pastes it, the child comes to class and presents it. But the child does not understand the work or does not understand what is happening or the work that has been done for him. The difficulty level, the level of difficulty, it is often difficult for a teacher to determine an appropriate level or standard when designing a coursework task, especially when the teacher is not skilled in designing coursework or assessment tasks. Plagiarism. Coursework tasks open doors for the possibility of plagiarism. It is easy for the learners to copy and paste information from the internet and present it as their own work without acknowledging the author or the owner of the work. Favors well-to-do learners. Coursework often requires a presentation of work. Some parents are not in the financial position to assist their children to buy materials required for the project. More appropriate for practical subjects. It is easy to do coursework projects in practical subjects. But with the skill and creative thinking, coursework assessment tasks can be given in all subjects. It adds to the workload of the teacher. Coursework projects require marking and grading from a teacher. Then we move over to Unit 2. Unit 2, we will look at the general and primary directives of Namibia. We have got the functions of the DNEA, which are to provide national and certification service for the school system, to assist in enhancing the quality of education, to monitor educational standards. Unit 3. We will look at the aims, constructions, application of assessment tools. We are going to look at the aims of matching questions. Matching questions present the learner with two lists: the set of statements and a set of responses or keywords. The learner is required to indicate which response from the second list corresponds or matches with each statement of a list. But how do you construct this type of matching questions? Provide more possible options than questions. Use longer phrases as questions and shorter phrases as options. Keep questions and options short and standard. Avoid verbal cues or specific determiners. Number each question and use alphabetical letters for options. Specify in the directions the basis for matching and whether or not responses can be used more than once. The advantages of matching questions. They are very, very simple to construct. Reading short responses in time, allowing more content to be included in a given set of matching questions, because matching items permit one to cover a lot of content in one exercise. They are an efficient way to measure, well suited to measure association between facts, reduces the effects of guessing, useful for assessing topics involving large amounts of factual information in an economical manner. The disadvantages are they are difficult to measure the learning objectives, requiring more than simple recall of information, difficult to construct due to problems of selecting a common set of keywords and options, can be very, very time consuming. The second one that we will look at is the true and false questions. True and false questions, the aims are to present the learner with statements followed by two alternatives, either true or false, which only one is the correct answer. How to construct them? Construct statements that are definitely true and definitely false. Use relatively short statements. Eliminate unnecessary statements. Keep true and false statement approximately the same length. Include an equal number of true and false statements. Test only one idea in one question. Have students cycle true or false for each question rather than to write the letter F or T, which can lead to a debate. Avoid verbal cues, specific determiners, and complex sentences. Avoid terms such as never and always. Never arrange answers in a pattern as shown in the example. Avoid taking statements directly from a text. Use positive rather than negative statements. Avoid lengthy or vague statements. Set a pass mark high to counter the guessing factor. That was the aims and constructions, advantages and disadvantages of true and false questions and matching questions. Let me go to Unit 5, the basic assessment concepts and perspective. Here we will look at the two terms that usually pop up most, which is the validity and reliability. Validity refers to the accuracy of a statement, whether or not it measures what it is supposed to measure. Even a test is reliable, but may not provide a valid measure or validity in its measure. Then we have got reliability, which refers to the extent to which statements are consistent. It should not make any difference whether the learner takes the assessment in the morning or in the afternoon, one day or the next day. Then we look at the left brain. The left brain, or the left part of the brain, specializes in recognizing the parts that make up a whole, in other words, the analytical thinking. The left hemisphere processing is a linear, logical, and sequential. It moves from one point to the next in a step-by-step manner. It lines up each detail in a chronological order and discovers the whole picture by examining its parts. It is most efficient for processing verbal information, such as encoding and decoding speech. Therefore, it is geared towards understanding and using language, listening, reading, speaking, and writing. It is involved in the memory of spoken and written messages. It plays a major role in the analysis of information. So the left brain, or the left hemisphere of your brain, is more concerned with analytical thinking. It is also more concerned with the language, the speaking, the reading, and the writing. Then we will look at the left brain. Left brain learners are good at linear and successive processing, such as those involved in language and mathematics. Left brain learners are also good at planning and following directions. These learners easily learn information in a lecture style or teaching approach. The following is important when designing activities for left brain learners. Left brain learners are, what you should keep in mind is the following: that they are good expressing themselves in words. They are good with symbolic language and can easily memorize vocabulary words. Good note takers and list makers. Good writing and spelling. Good at verbal expression. Good at mathematics and can easily memorize maths formulas. Good at structure and order. Enjoy schedule keeping and list making, and therefore good at planning and scheduling. Then we have got the right brain orientation. Right brain thinkers start with the big picture and work their way inwards. Right brain learners process information holistically, meaning as a whole. They learn by understanding the big picture and not the details. They concentrate on meaning, coherence, and aesthetics. Their attention to detail is diffuse rather than focus, which generates a tendency toward intuition problem solving. Solving are reached not from methodically applying formulas, but instead they bubble up as an aha moment. Right brain thinkers prefer the concrete to symbolic, and they will learn more effectively if they can touch it, see it, or connect with it, or on an emotional level. Left brain is non-verbal, and therefore right brain thinkers prefer to express themselves through physical action such as music, dance, or works of art. Now, when you want to construct an activity for right brain learners, they need to see or feel or touch the real object. They prefer hands-on activities. They need to draw or other problem to understand it. They need diagrams or in illustrations to help visualize the problem or solution. Need to make mental images of things they hear or read in order to remember the information. They learn visually and not by listening or to a lecture style of class. They require extra effort when reading instructions to ensure that they understand the assignment. They need support in making assignment lists and study schedules. They require more time to write a paper. They require more revisions. They rely more on spelling checkers, proofreading. They enjoy visual stimulation, hands-on learning. They are creative and socially enjoy working with others and completing projects or experiments rather than listening to lectures or writing essays. When you want to set a good exam, you need to remember the following. You need to define the content. You need to select the topics and the types of assessments. You need to gather all the material. Then you construct a range of questions with sample answers and a marking scheme. Type the paper and the sample answers in the marking scheme so that your work looks neat. Check your marks in grading. Complete assessment grids and sample answers. Check your questions against Bloom's taxonomy, the different learning style and brain orientations. Check for mistakes. Have your paper answer and sample answers to a colleague. Have the paper answer and the sample answers to a moderator. And then once all these have been done, then you have set a good paper and you can give your paper in for moderation. Then we look at Unit 6. Unit 6 deals with the marking and grading techniques. Various aspects relating to marking and the use of different assessment tools. That is holistic marking. Holistic marking or grading approach focuses on representing the learner in his or her own entirety. It begins with a decision that the teacher perform on the first day of school and with the decision that the teacher and administrator make on the learners regarding the end of year grading or promotion. It emphasizes the performance of the whole and interdependent parts of its parts. The holistic approach refers to grading the essay as a whole. Now, we have different ways of marking, different ways of recording marks, but one of them is the computer-assisted marking. I don't think Namibia has evolved or developed to such a stage yet, or maybe they have, but it would make our work as teachers or future teachers work very easy if we could have computer-assisted marking. Computer-assisted marking, no marking. Automatic marking abolishes marking time and allows results to be known by the module leader immediately after the test finishes. No moderation. It is a method which in general learners like. There is no plagiarism. Wider coverage of the range of module content than essay type of questions. It ensures that the learners are acquainted with more than a few selected topics of the module. Adds to the diversity of summative assessment. Provides an objective and consistent means for summative assessment. It is time effective. It enables assessment to be constructed using multimedia. It enhances validity and the reliability of the assessment. It enables the assessment of a wide range of topics very quickly. The need for double marking is totally eliminated. This time and resource saving allows more regular assessment, enabling more detailed knowledge of learners' progress and quicker identification of progress. Our work will be very easy and very simplified if we could all be equipped with computer-assisted marks. Tests can be tailored to match learners' ability with a formative assessment. It may be possible for the content to be verified automatically. It may be possible for the content to be verified automatically as the test itself is in progress, matching learners' weaknesses as they emerge during the test. It saves time in supervision and invigilation and marking, reduces subjectivity and human error, which we all make most of the time. If given a computer-based nature of the exercise, there is a substantial reduction in the printing costs. Statistical evaluation of the results can be generated electronically. The rest you may read in your study guide when you are reading upon computer-assisted marking. Then we go over to Unit 7. Then we will look at the role of feedback to learners after an assessment. The assessment should be based on clear and learning objectives. It should encourage and take account of pupil self-evaluation, highlight where success has occurred and where improvement needed to take place. It should be given promptly and regularly to learners in a form that is accessible to them. Give strategies for improvement. Have time allocated in which comments can be read. Expect some focused improvement based on the feedback. Students, it is very, very important that you go through your study guide, as this is also just a guide. It is also very important, once again, to memorize your work. Memorize and know what you are memorizing it for and for which type of work you are memorizing it for. Last but not least, success, as I usually say, is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. So students, do not be afraid to fail, but be afraid not to try. Every accomplishment starts with a decision to try. I wish you all the best with the upcoming exams. Good luck and thank you very much.